Claimed that that was the greatest team, the Montreal team was the greatest team that ever played in the National Hockey League. We won it with 2 lines, a spare centerman, and 4 defensemen and a goalkeeper. We beat them in 6 games.
Then it was on to Detroit and an epic battle. The Leafs won the first 3 games. Detroit, looking to avenge the heartbreak of 1942, came storming back to tie the series.
In Game 7, there was again, this huge pressure on the Leafs because everyone thought, well, now is Detroit going to do to the Leafs what had been done to them 3 years earlier?
Down the ice goes Sweeney Schreiner with a puck and passes it to Kennedy, who rifles it in the cage to win the Stanley Cup and the championship of the world.
With Broda and Apps back from the war, the Leafs were primed for a run unlike any the league had ever seen. And leading the way was Broda, who was a rock between the pipes. In fact, so strong was Turk, at one point he played every minute of every game for 3 straight years, a feat which may have impressed many but didn't keep Conn Smythe from benching him.
Broda was always a chunky goalie. Exercise was not a regimen he maintained on a daily basis, and Conn Smythe just sort of blew up and thought, well, this is ridiculous. You weigh 192 pounds, and I want you down to 180 before you play your next game. And so he benched him, and he cut him off right in the middle of his sort of Ironman streak and told him he had to lose weight. The benching only lasted 1 game, but the newspapers just ran with the story like crazy, and day after day, Mrs. Broda would be interviewed in the paper asking her what he ate, what Turk ate today, and what kind of a diet is he on, and what's he eating, and how are the children coping with this, and how are you doing to help them through this tough time?
Turk Broda was the outstanding playoff goalie, tough to beat in the playoffs. And the Leafs had a great defense system, but if Turk Broda was if you get me 1 goal, we'll win, and he would tell his teammates that.
And Broda was a favorite of the fans, for good reason.
Just at the start of the war, 1940, I had a very serious accident at work, and I got burnt with lime and lost my sight. But when I began to get a bit of sight back, I was in the hospital, and one day the nurse said, "There's somebody special to see you here." And he says, "Do you know me, kid?" And I thought, geez, it couldn't be. So I said to him, "Well, you look like Turk Broda, but Turk wouldn't come to see me." Well, he says, "You know, kid, why wouldn't Turk come to see you?" He says, "I am Turk."
Another key ingredient to Toronto's phenomenal run through the 40s was Syl Apps. The Leafs captain was an all-star 6 times. So respected was he, after serving as a 2nd lieutenant in World War II, he was immediately handed the C upon his return to the team.
And you idolized Syl Apps and was able to get his autograph one day. That was so meaningful to your life. It was something you treasured, and I remember it vividly to this day how Syl Apps put "Best wishes, Syl Apps" on my autograph. And I told my dad, look, he put 2 extra words on there. Isn't that really great of him? And he was my idol for life after that.
When Syl Apps was wearing number 10 and was the captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs, every kid in Canada wanted to be Syl Apps.
The man who molded the team on the ice was Clarence Hap Day. Regarded as one of the toughest coaches ever to step behind an NHL bench, his training camps were compared to prison camps. He believed the way you practiced was the way you played.
Hap Day was a disciplinarian with a great system and a defensive style of hockey. The players respected him, and they played for him.
With all the pieces in place, the Maple Leafs grabbed hold of the cup. In 1947, Toronto dethroned the Canadiens in 6 games.
And here it is, the winning goal. The Maple Leafs caught the coveted trophy, emblematic of World Championship hockey. Toronto fans breathe easy at last.
People in Toronto grabbed a hold of that Leaf team. They'd been wanting desperately for the Leafs to win.
Toronto became the center of the hockey universe. The Maple Leafs were champions and pioneers. To start the following season, Toronto took on the best in the league's first ever All-Star game. Later that year, they acquired Chicago's Max Bentley in a stunning 7-player trade.
Conn Smythe always believed in strength down the center. It was a natural trade. The Leafs needed a top centerman, and the Chicago needed players. The Leafs had Abs, Kennedy, and Bentley as their 3 centermen, and no one could touch them.
With an all-star lineup of its own, Toronto was hockey royalty, and the Leafs were not to be overthrown. They captured the cup for a 2nd straight year with a sweep of Detroit.
People were just mesmerized by the team. There was a great aura about the club.
And nothing could stop the juggernaut.
Their farm team, I think, could have beat most NHL teams. They were so strong.
Leafs are out to win the Stanley Cup for the 3rd straight year, something no team has been able to accomplish in the trophy's dramatic history.
Toronto did the unthinkable. Another sweep of Detroit and a 3rd straight cup. 3 years had turned the team into a dynasty and players into heroes.
The Maple Leafs were our heroes and our people that we looked up to.
2 years later, Toronto put the exclamation point on an era.
Toronto Maple Leafs versus Montreal Canadiens. This has been one of the hardest fought Stanley Cup series in all hockey history.
The Leafs actually tied the game in the last minute of play with the goalie on the bench, which is kind of neat because people don't often remember that part of the game.
Todd Sloan's goal forced overtime, and Bill Barilko scored one for the ages.
Cleared off to the side. He passed right out to Barilko. Down the left wing. He just scored!
Toronto celebrated its 5th cup in 7 years. As the book closed on the league's first true dynasty, the Leafs stood as the standard for all teams aspiring to greatness.
We want to shift our focus now to the 1960s, another grand period in Toronto Maple Leaf history. 4 Stanley Cups. It was the time when Foster Hewitt was set to hand over the reins to Bill Hewitt, who could introduce us to a new set of Hewitt.
Here we are at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto, all set for the face-off. Now it's the Leafs coming back, but Muhammad's getting a chance. He shoots, he scores! Flex over to Bathgate again. Bathgate gets that turn of it, even scores! And the game is over. Jeffrey coming out in front of shot, and Bauer makes the save.
The Maple Leafs franchise enjoyed a stunning renaissance in the 1960s. But before the rebirth, there were years of struggle.
There was the Barilko winning goal in '51, and then his sad departure from this earth in a plane crash a few weeks later.
Barilko's body went unfound. The Leafs soldiered on despite the tragedy, but it took them years to recover. In the meantime, another dynasty took their place.
Montreal and Detroit were the big rivalry in the early to mid 1950s. But then Punch Imlach arrived on the scene here in Toronto.
He was a shrewd motivator with a keen eye for talent.
I've had a lot of coaches, and I think Punch's asset is that he can measure to within 1 ounce of player's ability on a bench.
Immediately, Punch Imlach instilled a confidence in his players, and he said, we're going to make the playoffs, and then we're going to win the cup.
We had a group of young players that the Maple Leaf Scouts had produced. Bobby Pulford, Bob Bond, Billy Harris, Carl Brewer, Dickie Duff, myself. We came along. So we had a nice mix of the youth with the experience.
When he came to the Maple Leafs, he was sort of the thing that brought us all together.
Inspired, the Leafs made good on the first part of their coach's promise as they made the playoffs.
I said that we'd beat Boston in 6, and it took us 7 games to beat Boston. I guess I got mixed up a little. Maybe the crystal ball was a little hazy. It's probably that we'll beat Montreal in 6.
However, Toronto would fall to the Canadiens in the finals that year and the next. Though the Leafs were unsuccessful in stopping Montreal's run, they did reignite a rivalry. And Imlach was more driven than ever to win the battle.